Hey guys, welcome back. This is session number 40 of our Hey guys, welcome back. This is session number 40 of our exploration of the Gospel of Mark. And we're going to close chapter number 11 in this session with the lesson that Jesus teaches from that withered fig tree. And we're closing that Markan sandwich. Remember, we talked about the ABA format, the interruption that we had with the temple. We're coming back to the fig tree. So fig tree, temple in the middle. We're going to come back to the fig tree in this session and talk about what Jesus was getting at more with this fig tree. So let's go ahead and dive right into the text. Mark chapter 11 verse 20 says, "As they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away at its roots." Well, now we're at Wednesday morning in the Passion Week, in Jesus' final week. So they're passing by on that morning. This is the night before what we know as Maundy Thursday, where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. And they pass by on this Wednesday morning and see this fig tree withered away at its roots. We want to look at that actual phrase and talk about it for a moment here. What does it mean to be withered away at its roots? Remember, Jesus had cursed the fig tree, right, in this account, earlier in this account. And as a result, the death that resulted had actually reached the roots of its tree, which in essence makes the tree useless. Again, Jesus is using this here as an illustration. And here's where we discover the meaning of that illustration. Because when you look at the tree and you see that there are leaves on it, but you know that there's not going to be any fruit from it, there's a problem not above the surface, but underneath the surface, right? In the roots. So the roots, when you look at the tree of Israel, the roots of those trees are actually the spiritual leaders of Israel that we just saw in the temple, right? Those spiritual leaders, the roots of them are actually dead. And because the roots are dead, the leadership is dead, the whole tree is dead, right? And those are going to be the Jews who don't believe in Jesus. So they are all dead spiritually because the leadership refuses to stand up and to believe that this is the coming Messiah. And look at who speaks up here. Our friend Peter, always talking, right? And Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." Now, Peter recognized one thing here in this text. He recognized that judgment had come upon the fig tree. And why did he notice that judgment? Because it withered away. It had been cursed and it withered away. So in the same way, Jesus' death, which is coming up on the cross, is going to pronounce judgment on those people who don't believe in his identity as the Messiah, and ultimately cause them to wither away. And it starts with those spiritual leaders, those chief priests and those scribes, and then that moves to the roots, to the tree itself, where Israel itself is going to reject the Messiah and also wither away spiritually. Look how Jesus answers them. "Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him." Now we're going to spend a little bit of time on these two verses because I think it's really important. A lot of people take these verses as some type of promise that God is going to answer all your prayers by you having enough faith and not enough doubt in your heart. But I think one thing we need to remember in this text and always keep in mind, especially when we're praying, is the will of God. But before we get there, it kind of seems like Jesus straight ignores Peter's question here. He talks about the fig tree and that it withers away, and then Jesus turns around and talks about having faith in God. So what gives here? What gives in this text? Jesus says, have faith in God, and whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown to the sea, and does not doubt, but believes it will be done for him. So Jesus here actually chooses to use this as an opportunity not to affirm the judgment of Israel, which is clear, but to talk about the faith that is necessary for the miracle that Peter had experienced or seen, which is the fig tree withering. He talks about the faith that is necessary for that, right? Jesus's point here is this, that we as believers need to have complete dependent trust in God, that he may be able to accomplish what we can't accomplish in our own human strength, that he can accomplish impossible things through prayer, right? James 1:6 says this, right? What does it say? It says, but let him ask in faith without doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave. James 1:6 says this, right? It says, but let him ask in faith without doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. That's what Jesus is getting at here. Ask without doubting. Ask in faith, knowing that God can do the impossible. Now let's talk about commanding mountains here. It's always a metaphor in Scripture that talks about commanding mountains or saying something to mountains. This is symbolic of being able to do something impossible. And I think that we need to look at the assumption here in Jesus's words. And that assumption is that the difficulty that we experience needs to overcome. And that assumption is this, that the difficulty that needs to be overcome is God's will for the believer to overcome it. You have to grasp that to understand this text. Otherwise, you'll be believing stuff in faith outside of God's will and get frustrated because God doesn't answer the way that you want him to answer. Some people use this verse or these verses as a blank check to say, God will do whatever we ask. Remember, James and John asked that same question. Grant us whatever we want, right? So we have to be careful that we don't enter James and John territory. So we have to be careful that we don't enter James and John territory here. It's not about having crazy faith. Yes, it's great to have a great amount of faith, but that's not what Jesus is getting at here. He's talking about prayer that has one thing as top priority, and that is God's will. Your will be done, Lord, here on earth as it already is in heaven. That's the Lord's prayer, that God's will triumph over everything else. Mark 11:24 says, therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you've received it, and it will be yours. So as disciples, we can believe that we will have what we request in prayer when we ask for God's will to take place. That's what Matthew 6:10 talks about, and Matthew 7:7 talks about, right? What does it say? Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Matthew 6:10, right? So when you pray and you believe, make sure all of that is wrapped in this one thing that Jesus is getting at here, the will of God. That's what he talks about when James and John make that request, right? He said, it's not up to me. Like, God is going to place at my right hand and my left hand whoever he wants. You need to be seeking God's will as opposed to your own special will and your own special request, right? And he says, and whenever you stand praying, forgive. He takes a little bit of a shift here and talks about forgiveness. If you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive your trespasses. Now, here's the important part of this text, I think, because he talks about forgiveness here. So faith is a condition of answered prayers, but so is forgiveness. Think about that. Faith is a huge component. We need to have faith, but you also have to forgive other people in order to have your prayers answered. Sometimes I think we forget that, but Jesus taught this over and over again. Make sure you forgive others so that your prayers won't be hindered. He talked about if you have a fault against your brother, leave your gift at the altar and go and be reconciled, and then come back, offer forgiveness, give forgiveness to that person, and then come back and give your gift or offer your prayer. And I think that is going to be the key takeaway from this passage. We understand the concept of faith and having great faith and praying the will of God. But I think we have to be reminded about forgiveness, because our heavenly prayers may be hindered by our earthly unforgiveness. Let me say that again. Our heavenly prayers may be hindered by our earthly unforgiveness. So think about your relationships, your horizontal relationships right now. And think about your prayer life. Think about how many people you may need to forgive so that God himself may be able to continue to answer your prayers, show up in your life. Because apparently what Jesus is getting at here is that forgiveness is a key component to answer prayers. And this is so hard for us because people are so difficult. There's some people that we just don't want to forgive, but Jesus himself tells us that we must forgive them. And that is a key component to our prayer life. That's just crazy. And it's something that's going to take the Spirit of God for some of us, especially me with some people, to overcome, to be able to forgive that person so that our heavenly prayers may not be hindered. Hopefully that was helpful. This is the end of that Markan sandwich. This is what Jesus was getting at with cursing that fig tree, was having the great faith and then also having a great amount of forgiveness for those who are around you. He continues to teach this lesson throughout the Gospels, and I think it's a lesson that we all need to learn, understand, and apply every single day. All right, folks, that's been session number 40. Looking forward to our next session as we dive into chapter number 12 in session number 41. Until then, grace and peace to you all.